My 7-year-old niece ruined Christmas, and I'm so proud of the person she became doing it. I woke up at 6 a.m. to the sound of glass shattering downstairs. I ran down expecting a break-in, but instead, I found my niece Poppy standing in the wreckage of what used to be her cousin's presents, her uncle's hammer still in her hand. "Our presents!" the boys screamed, dropping to their knees and picking up bits of their crushed tablets and gaming headsets. My brother David, the boy's dad, started moving to the hallway closet to grab his belt while staring at Poppy. But before he could do anything, the boys, 13 and 15, lunged at Poppy and tackled her to the ground. They started hitting her repeatedly, clawing at her face, and nobody would interfere. I had to pull them off myself. When Poppy got up, she was covered in bruises and bleeding from her eyebrow. But despite everything, she just sat down calmly. Her chest puffed out, a smirk on her face, almost like she was proud of destroying Christmas. "Where's our good presents?" the boys screamed again. That's when everyone saw it. The boys' most expensive presents, their PlayStations, iPhones, all the really good stuff, was nowhere to be found. Not destroyed, not still wrapped, just gone. "Poppy," I said quietly, kneeling beside her while David started restraining his kids who were now going to get knives from the kitchen. "Tell me what happened." She looked at the family members now gathering, all horrified. "Your sons are bullies," she said to the dad, blood still dripping from her eyebrow. "You little—" He went to lunge at her, but I grabbed him. "Last year, they destroyed my friend's Christmas present when she brought it to school. Her mom saved for 6 months for that dollhouse. They stomped on it while she cried." David's wife tried to defend them, but Poppy continued. "This whole year, they've destroyed every present I got. My birthday telescope they smashed. My art set they set on fire. We never knew they—" David started. "I said it to everyone at Thanksgiving." Poppy cut him off. "I told you they ruined the only photo of my mommy and daddy that I had before they died." Poppy was crying now. "And you said I should stop being mad at them, that they were just kids playing." I was horrified. Working overseas, Poppy never told me any of this. "Is this true?" I raised my voice. The room shifted uncomfortably. Nobody would meet my eyes. Poppy then wiped blood from her face. "So yeah, I destroyed their presents." The mom wife gasped. "Those presents? But that's not why I did it," Poppy interrupted. The room went silent. "Sweetheart, why did you do it then?" I asked her. That's when she pointed to our grandmother in the corner, staring blankly ahead in her Christmas pajamas, lost in her dementia. "They stole from Grandma. They stole $2,000 from her." I saw the kids' faces drop, the first time they showed any emotion throughout this. David's eyes widened. "That's impossible." But Poppy stood up defiantly. "Last Tuesday night I couldn't sleep. I heard footsteps in Grandma's room at 2 a.m. Everyone went quiet. I watched your kids take her card from her purse," Poppy said to the mom. "They found her PIN in her diary. Then they snuck out. I followed them to the ATM." "You're lying," one boy started. "I have a video," Poppy said, pulling out her phone. The video showed them withdrawing huge amounts. They started to shake in fear. Their dad grabbed Grandma's phone with shaking hands. He checked the withdrawal and his face went wide. "Son, why would you—" "She gave us that money," the boys shouted out in a last-ditch attempt to save themselves. "She wanted us to have it." That's when Poppy ran upstairs. Drawers slammed and she came back clutching a letter. In Grandma's shaky handwriting it said, "Dear Poppy, I'm getting worse. Some days I don't remember breakfast, but I remember the $2,000 I saved for Christmas charity. I want poor families to have presents. If I forget, please remind me. Love, Grandma." The dad was almost crying. "Why didn't you tell me, Poppy?" "I did tell you," she shouted. "And you told me to stop lying. You slapped the phone out of my hand when I tried to show you the video. You hit me when I tried to look for the money." He put his head in his hands in shame. The mom glared at the boys through her tears, making it obvious they would face consequences. "So, at 3:30 this morning," Poppy continued, "I listed all my cousin's best presents online, for free. That's why they're gone. Nobody could even protest now. People came to get them in minutes. I didn't take a penny." What followed was a minute of silence while everyone stared in shock. And then finally, the boys made their move. They tried to grab Poppy's phone to delete evidence, but she dodged them, backing away. "I already backed it up like Uncle taught me. You can't delete it now," she said. David turned desperate, grabbing my arm. "You're her favorite uncle. Make her delete the video. We'll handle this as a family." I looked at my 7-year-old niece, standing firm against boys twice her size. I think she already handled it. But then, while David's wife was checking their bank account, the older boy suddenly bolted to the kitchen. We heard drawers slamming. Then he reappeared with the knife from earlier. Before anyone could stop him, he ran at Poppy with it clutched in his hand. I threw myself forward and grabbed his wrist just as he reached Poppy. The knife was inches from her face when I twisted his arm hard to the side. He fought back harder than I expected for a 15-year-old. We struggled and spun around while everyone else just stood there frozen. His brother jumped in to help him and grabbed my other arm. I yanked my hand free and kept twisting the older one's wrist until his fingers started opening. The knife started to fall, but he grabbed it with his other hand. That's when I felt the blade slice across my forearm as we fought for control. Hot pain shot up my arm, but I couldn't let go. I finally got both hands on his wrist and bent it backward until he screamed and dropped the knife. It hit the floor with a metal clatter, and I kicked it as hard as I could. The knife slid across the tile and disappeared under the stove where nobody could reach it. Blood was already soaking through my shirt sleeve and dripping onto the floor. I shoved the older boy backward so hard he crashed into the wall. Then I stepped between him and Poppy, who was still sitting there with that same defiant look on her face. David's wife screamed when she saw all the blood pooling on the floor. David just stood there with his mouth open like he couldn't believe what just happened. "Nobody moves toward that knife or toward Poppy," I said loud enough for everyone to hear. The boys were breathing hard and glaring at me with pure hate in their eyes. They started pacing back and forth like wild animals looking for another chance to attack. Blood kept running down Poppy's face from her eyebrow, but she wasn't even crying. I needed to get her somewhere safe before these kids tried something else. I backed toward the door that led to the backyard and turned the lock with one hand while keeping my eyes on both boys. "Poppy, take Grandma upstairs to the bathroom and lock the door," I told her without looking away from the boys. She stood up slowly and walked over to where Grandma was sitting, confused in her chair. Grandma kept asking what all the noise was about while Poppy helped her to her feet. The boys started moving toward the stairs, but I stepped in their way. "You're not going anywhere near them," I said. Poppy guided Grandma up the stairs one step at a time while I blocked the bottom with my body. My arm was throbbing and blood was still dripping, but I could still use it. The older boy kept flexing his hands like he wanted to grab something else to use as a weapon. His brother was whispering something to him that I couldn't hear. Once I heard the bathroom door close and the lock click upstairs, I pulled out my phone with my good hand. The boys saw what I was doing and started yelling threats about what they'd do to Poppy when this was over. I ignored them and dialed 911 while David finally seemed to snap out of his shock. The phone rang once before the operator answered. "We have a juvenile who attacked a 7-year-old child with a knife," I said quickly. "Multiple injuries and suspected elder financial abuse. We need police and ambulance. David grabbed my shoulder and tried to pull the phone away. Hang up, we can handle this as a family, he begged. I shrugged him off and gave the operator our address while the boys kept pacing and muttering threats. Units are on the way, she said. Keep everyone separated and safe. David's wife had her phone out now and was scrolling through their bank account with shaking hands. Her face got whiter with each screen she looked at. More and more withdrawals kept showing up that she hadn't known about. David kept insisting we didn't need police and that I was overreacting. Your 15-year-old just tried to stab a 7-year-old, I told him. Wake up. The younger boy suddenly sprinted toward the stairs, yelling that he needed to delete something from his computer. I moved fast and body blocked him so hard he bounced backward and fell on his butt. His brother tried to push past me too, but I planted myself firmly on the bottom step. You're not going anywhere near Poppy or deleting anything, I said. They both tried to shove me at the same time, but I outweighed them combined. Police are already on their way and all the evidence is already backed up, I announced loud enough for everyone in the house to hear. The boys looked at each other with panic in their eyes and started whispering about their phones. Sit down and shut up, I told them. David's wife was crying now and showing David the bank statements on her phone screen. Thousands of dollars had been taken out over the past few weeks. From upstairs, Poppy's small voice came through the bathroom door saying the video was saved in 3 different places just like I taught her. Poppy's sitting there bleeding with that smirk while her cousins are screaming about destroyed presents. Something tells me this little girl planned every single detail of this morning, from the timing to having that letter ready in her room upstairs. Relief washed over me knowing the evidence was safe. I could hear Grandma through the door asking Poppy where her purse went and why they were in the bathroom. The sound of sirens started getting louder from down the street. Family members who had been watching from the living room doorway started moving around quickly. Some were fixing their clothes and others were putting their phones away, trying to look normal. David kept running his hands through his hair over and over while muttering about how this got so out of hand. The front door opened hard enough to bang against the wall and 2 cops walked in with their hands on their holsters. I raised my good hand up high while keeping pressure on my bleeding arm with the other. I'm the one who called, I said quickly. There's a knife under the stove. The first cop was a big guy with gray hair who looked like he'd seen everything. His badge said Mercier, and he took one look at the blood on my shirt and the chaos in the living room before nodding to his partner. The younger cop moved toward the boys while Mercier came straight to me. Tell me what happened fast, he said. I pointed at the older boy first, then at Poppy, who was still upstairs with Grandma. He attacked my niece with a knife after she exposed them stealing from our grandmother with dementia. Mercier's jaw tightened as I kept talking about the stolen money and the destroyed presents and the years of bullying nobody stopped. Blood was soaking through the towel on my arm and dripping onto the floor. The younger cop had already moved between the boys and everyone else while Mercier pulled out his radio. David started toward Mercier but stopped when the cop held up his hand. Sir, stay back while we secure the scene. Mercier looked at his partner and pointed at the older boy. Cuff him for everyone's safety. The kid started yelling that it wasn't fair, but the younger cop was already pulling his hands behind his back. The metal clicked around his wrists and suddenly he looked like what he was, a criminal. The younger one started crying and backing toward the door, but the cop told him to sit on the front steps where he could watch him. David's face went red and he started arguing about the handcuffs. Protocol when weapons are involved, Mercier said without looking at him. I walked to the stairs and called up for Poppy to come down with Grandma. They appeared at the top with Poppy holding Grandma's hand and helping her down each step. Mercier's whole face changed when he saw Poppy's injuries. The cut above her eye was still bleeding and her face had bruises already turning purple. He grabbed his radio immediately and called for paramedics while Poppy just stood there holding Grandma's hand. Sweetheart, do you feel safe showing me that video? Mercier asked gently. Poppy pulled out her phone with steady hands and found the video file. The screen showed the boys at the ATM in the middle of the night withdrawing money over and over. David's wife started sobbing harder with each transaction that played. Mercier watched the whole thing, then looked at the boys with disgust. Red and blue lights filled the windows as an ambulance pulled up outside. 2 paramedics rushed in with their bags and came straight to me first. They unwrapped the bloody towel and examined the cut while I tried not to wince. Needs proper cleaning but no stitches required, one said, while the other got out bandages. They cleaned it with something that burned like fire, then wrapped it tight with white gauze. Then they moved to Poppy, who sat perfectly still while they checked her eye. This needs proper closure at the ER, the female paramedic said, and we should x-ray these bruises to be safe. Grandma kept asking why everyone was hurt and trying to touch Poppy's face. Did I do something wrong? She asked over and over. Mercier looked at me and pointed toward the kitchen. We need to retrieve that weapon safely. He handed me a pair of tongs from his evidence kit and held open a clear plastic bag. I got down on my hands and knees and reached under the stove with the tongs. The knife was right where I'd kicked it and I pulled it out carefully without touching it. Mercier sealed the bag and wrote on it with a marker while his body cam recorded everything. Through the window, I could see the older boy in the back of the patrol car, finally looking scared instead of angry. Mercier pulled out a small recorder and set it on the coffee table. I need formal statements starting with you since you're going to the hospital. I sat down and told him everything from hearing the glass break to the knife attack. David kept trying to interrupt to say things weren't that bad, but Mercier shut him down. You'll get your turn, sir. When Mercier asked about prior incidents, my stomach dropped. All those times Poppy had tried to tell us about destroyed toys and stolen things and mean pranks. She told everyone at Thanksgiving about the photo of her dead parents that the boys burned. She'd begged for help, and we'd all ignored her. David shifted in his chair when Mercier asked why none of this was reported to authorities. Kids will be kids, David mumbled, but even he didn't sound convinced anymore. Mercier turned to David with a hard look on his face. We're looking at assault with a deadly weapon, elder financial abuse, and ongoing child abuse allegations. David tried to argue they were just boys being boys, but Mercier cut him off. The state takes elder theft very seriously, and this will trigger mandatory reports to CPS and Adult Protective Services. Before anyone could respond, Grandma wandered into the hallway from the bathroom. Where's my purse? She asked. I need to give money to the poor families for Christmas. Her voice was so confused and innocent that David's wife covered her face in shame. Even David couldn't look at his mother. Someone took my money, Grandma said sadly. I was saving it for charity. Mercier asked David's wife for the bank statements, and she pulled them up on her phone with shaking hands. Each withdrawal matched perfectly with the timestamps on Poppy's video. $2,000 taken in chunks of 500 over 4 nights. The reality that their sons were thieves was finally hitting both parents hard. Mercier pulled out his paperwork and asked if I wanted to press charges and get a protective order for Poppy. I said yes right away. David grabbed my arm and started begging me not to do this. He kept saying it would ruin his boys' futures, and they were just kids who made a mistake. I looked him straight in the eyes and reminded him that his son just tried to kill kill my niece with a knife. The decision felt heavy, but I knew it was right. Mercier started filling out the forms while David stood there shaking. The paramedics checked Poppy's cuts and said she needed proper stitches at the hospital. They wanted everything documented too, since this was now a police case. I told them I'd ride with her. David's wife asked if she could come, but I told her no. Not after she defended those boys all these years when they hurt Poppy. Poppy took my hand as we walked to the ambulance. For the first time all morning, she actually let herself lean on someone. The ambulance ride was quiet at first. Then Poppy started explaining how she pulled everything off. She said she got up at 3:30 a.m. and listed all the expensive presents online for free. She used marketplace apps and wrote "first come, first serve" in the descriptions. People started showing up within minutes to grab everything. Her voice stayed steady, but I could see her hands shaking now. The adrenaline was finally wearing off. At the ER, the triage nurse took one look at Poppy and marked it as suspected abuse. She brought us straight back to a room and started taking pictures of every bruise and scratch. She asked Poppy gentle questions about what happened. Poppy answered clearly, but I could see how tired she was getting. Dr. Jules Madison came in to stitch up Poppy's eyebrow. She talked softly about random stuff like her cat and favorite movies to keep Poppy distracted. She was so gentle and patient. She made sure Poppy felt safe and asked permission before each step. I held Poppy's hand while she got 5 stitches. I was so proud of how brave she was being through all of this. The hospital social worker showed up next and said she had to make a CPS report. She explained this was normal when a child came in with these kinds of injuries. She said it would actually help us get protection orders and services faster. I agreed right away because we needed all the official documentation we could get. My phone buzzed with a text from Mercier. He said the knife was logged as evidence and both boys were at juvenile intake being processed. The older one might face detention because he used a weapon. The younger one would probably be released to a relative since David was questioned. Reading that made everything feel more real. These kids were actually facing serious consequences. I pulled out my phone and messaged my boss overseas about needing emergency leave. I kept it vague, but said it involved my niece's safety and legal stuff. The time difference meant I wouldn't hear back for hours. Now I had work stress on top of everything else. While we waited for more paperwork, David texted me privately. He said we could still fix this if I didn't help with the prosecution. He claimed the boys learned their lesson and we didn't need to ruin their lives. Reading his message made me so mad. He still didn't get how serious this was. His son tried to stab a 7-year-old girl. I took a screenshot of his text and didn't respond. I knew this might count as witness tampering or something. While waiting for discharge papers, I rewatched Poppy's ATM video on her phone. Seeing those 2 boys stealing from their grandmother made me sick. They knew she had dementia, and they took advantage of her. I saved the video to 3 different cloud services. Finally, someone who knows how to preserve evidence properly. 3 different cloud backups while sitting in an ER is peak responsible adulting. Unlike certain fathers still texting about fixing this, like it's a parking ticket instead of attempted stabbing. Then I forwarded it to my personal email and sent a copy to a trusted friend overseas. I needed to protect this evidence in case something happened to Poppy's phone. The nurse came back with more forms and said we'd be there another hour at least. Poppy was starting to fall asleep in the hospital bed. Everything was catching up with her. I sat there watching her rest and thinking about what came next. We had police reports and medical records now. The boys were in custody, but I knew this was just the beginning of a long process. David and his wife would probably get lawyers. They'd try to make this go away, but I wasn't going to let them sweep this under the rug anymore. Poppy deserved justice for everything they put her through. My phone buzzed again with another text from David. This time he was threatening to tell my boss about my unstable behavior if I didn't drop the charges. I screenshot that one too and finally blocked his number. The social worker came back with a victim advocate who explained what would happen next. Court dates and custody hearings and counseling services. It was overwhelming, but at least we had support now. Poppy woke up when they were talking and listened carefully to everything. Even at 7 years old, she understood this was important. She asked if the boys would go to jail, and the advocate explained juvenile detention worked differently, but there would definitely be consequences for what they did. My phone started buzzing while the advocate was still explaining things. The bank's fraud department was calling back about grandma's stolen money. The woman on the phone said they needed official subpoenas to get the ATM camera footage and transaction records. She explained that even with clear proof of theft, getting back money withdrawn with the right PIN was almost impossible. The bank considered it an authorized transaction since the correct code was used. I wanted to punch the wall hearing that, but just thanked her and hung up. 20 minutes later, a woman in business clothes showed up at the hospital room. She introduced herself as Ginny Abernathy from Child Protective Services and said she needed to interview Poppy alone according to their rules. I had to wait outside in the hallway while she spent 40 minutes talking to my niece. Through the door I could hear Poppy's small voice describing years of being hurt that I never knew about. She talked about the boys breaking her things on purpose and hitting her when no adults were around. She mentioned being locked in closets and having her food taken away. Every word made my stomach turn knowing I'd been overseas working while this happened. Ginny finally came out and asked about my living situation and if I could take Poppy temporarily. I explained my job meant traveling overseas a lot, but immediately said I'd take her anyway, no matter what problems it caused. She said they'd need to check my apartment, but given everything that happened, keeping Poppy with family was better than foster care. She pulled out her phone and called David right there in the hallway. I could hear him yelling through her phone asking why CPS was involved in family business. Ginny stayed calm and explained it was mandatory when a child gets assaulted with a weapon. She told him a safety plan was being put in place immediately. The boys couldn't have any contact with Poppy at all. David kept arguing, but Ginny just repeated the rules without getting upset. She'd clearly dealt with angry parents before. While she was still on the phone, Jules Madison came back with a thick folder of papers. She had detailed documentation of every cut and bruise on Poppy for the CPS file and any court stuff that might happen. She took more photos with a special camera and measured each injury with a ruler. Everything got written down in medical terms on official forms. Jules quietly told me she'd seen too many cases like this where nobody stood up for the kid. She was glad someone finally protected Poppy. After Jules left, Ginny explained she was issuing a verbal no-contact directive that started right away. The boys couldn't come near Poppy at all until there was a formal hearing. If they violated it, they'd be detained immediately in juvenile hall. The relief I felt was huge, knowing Poppy had real protection now. I remembered Grandma's letter about the charity money and pulled it out of my pocket. Ginny photographed it with her phone for her file. She said elder financial abuse combined with child assault made this a serious case that wouldn't get dismissed. The letter proving what Grandma really wanted to do with the money would be important evidence. My phone rang, and it was David's wife crying, so hard I could barely understand her. She admitted she knew the boys were getting worse but didn't want to believe they'd hurt family. She found more evidence on their phones after we left. There were texts where they bragged to friends about making Poppy cry. They had videos of destroying her stuff while laughing. She found searches about how to hurt someone without leaving marks. Her admission felt way too late, but I told her to share everything with the investigators anyway. While I was on the phone with her, Mercier texted me. The case was elevated from simple theft to elder abuse charges. Those carried mandatory minimums even for kids their age. The prosecutor was taking it seriously because both victims were vulnerable. The boys were facing real consequences for the first time. We finally got discharge papers from the ER around noon. They gave us wound care instructions and multiple copies of all the medical documentation. The nurse showed me how to change Poppy's bandages and what signs of infection to watch for. Poppy fell asleep in the car within 2 minutes of leaving the hospital. She was completely exhausted from everything that happened. I drove super carefully to my apartment, checking the mirrors constantly. Part of me was paranoid about being followed even though the boys were still at the police station. My apartment wasn't really set up for a kid, but we'd figure it out. I carried Poppy inside without waking her up and put her on my bed. She looked so small with all those bandages. I sat in the chair next to the bed with all the paperwork spread out on my lap. There were custody forms and court dates and counseling referrals. The advocate had given me a folder an inch thick with resources and phone numbers. Everything felt overwhelming, but at least Poppy was safe now. She woke up after an hour asking where we were. I explained this was my place and she'd be staying here for a while. She asked if the boys could find us and I promised her they couldn't come here. Ginny had made that very clear with the no contact order. The next morning I called the number Ginny gave me for the court hearing and found out it was set for 3 days later. I spent those days getting Poppy settled in my apartment, moving my work stuff to make room for her things, and trying to keep her mind off everything. The courthouse was packed when we got there, and we had to wait 2 hours before our case got called. The judge looked at all the evidence Ginny presented, the video from Poppy's phone, the photos of her injuries, the bank records showing the stolen money. She ordered the boys to stay away from Poppy completely. No contact at all, not even through other people. She also said they had to stay with their aunt while CPS did their investigation into the home. David sat there with his head down while his wife kept wiping her eyes. After court, I got a call from someone at juvenile intake who told me what happened with the boys. The older one wouldn't talk to anyone, just sat there glaring at everybody. The younger one broke down crying and admitted everything they'd done to Poppy and other kids at the school. The intake officer said they were looking at possible diversion programs if the boys showed they were really sorry and willing to change. That afternoon, I took Poppy to the store to buy a safe for all the important papers and backup copies of her evidence. It cost more than I wanted to spend, but after everything that happened, I needed to know her proof was secure. She picked the combination herself, using numbers that meant something to her, the date her parents died, and her mom's birthday. I started calling therapists from the list Ginny gave us, but every single one had a 6-week wait for regular appointments. Finally, one office said they had a crisis counselor who could see Poppy twice right away to help her deal with the immediate trauma. I booked both sessions immediately, even though I knew 2 sessions wouldn't be enough for what she'd been through. 5 days after Christmas, I woke up to find Grandma gone from her room. I had to leave Poppy with my neighbor while I drove around looking for her. I found her at a bus stop 3 miles away, trying to get to church to donate money for poor families, even though she didn't have any money with her. The stress from everything was making her confusion worse, and she didn't recognize me at first. I spent hours that week researching memory care places, but everything had wait lists months long and cost more than our whole family could afford. David should have been helping with this, but he was dealing with lawyer bills for the boys now. Grandma needed professional help, but there was no way to pay for it. 2 weeks later, we had the preliminary juvenile hearing. The prosecutor laid out a diversion program where the boys would have to pay back the money they stole, go to counseling, and do community service. If they completed everything successfully, they wouldn't get formal charges on their record. Part of me wanted them punished harder, but I knew Poppy needed stability more than revenge. The prosecutor explained the problem with restitution, though. The boys had spent all the stolen money on those expensive presents that Poppy gave away for free on Christmas morning. Ginny shows up and suddenly everyone's following protocol. David's wife finding those phone searches feels awfully convenient timing for someone who claimed she didn't know. I'm curious why the bank needs the right pin to call it theft when they have a confused elderly victim. There was no way to get that money back, and the boys didn't have any way to pay it. The prosecutor suggested they could work part-time jobs and pay it back slowly over the next year. I told them I'd agree to the diversion program, but only if the protective orders stayed in place the whole time and Poppy's safety was guaranteed. The judge agreed and added that the boys had to stay in counseling for at least 6 months. It felt like letting them off easy, but I had to focus on helping Poppy heal, not on punishing them. That same week, I had to deal with my job situation. I submitted all the paperwork from CPS and the court to my employer asking for leave. They gave me 1 month unpaid, which was both a relief and terrifying, since my savings would drain fast with 2 people to support now. I accepted it anyway, because Poppy needed me there. Over the next few weeks, things settled into a routine. Poppy went to her 2 crisis counseling sessions, which helped a little bit. The counselor taught her some breathing exercises for when she had nightmares about the boys coming after her. I kept calling the therapy waitlist every day hoping for cancellations. Meanwhile, David and his wife were dealing with their own problems. The CPS investigation was ongoing, and they had to do parenting classes and home visits. The boys were staying with David's sister, who called me once to complain about how difficult they were being. I told her that wasn't my problem anymore. Grandma had 2 more wandering episodes that month. Once the police found her trying to walk to her old house from 40 years ago. Another time she was at the grocery store putting random items in her cart, thinking she was shopping for a church fundraiser. Each time made it clearer she couldn't stay at home much longer, but we still couldn't afford proper care. The diversion program started for the boys in February. They had to report to a probation officer every week and show proof they were looking for jobs. The older one got hired at a fast food place, but got fired after 3 days for arguing with his manager. The younger one lasted 2 weeks at a grocery store before quitting. The probation officer warned them they had to stick with jobs or face real charges. David got the court order for parenting classes and anger management the same week. He called me complaining about having to drive 40 minutes each way to the only approved program in our area. His wife told me later he showed up to the first class 20 minutes late and sat in the back row with his arms crossed. The instructor made him move to the front after he kept checking his phone. At least he went, though. The anger management sessions were worse because they met twice a week and cost $200 each time. He tried to get out of them by saying he couldn't afford it, but the judge said he could sell his boat if money was that tight. 2 weeks after everything went down, the school counselor called about meeting with Poppy. She had this calm way of talking that made Poppy Poppy actually open up? Instead of pushing some big forgiveness plan like the last therapist tried, she just focused on small stuff. Could Poppy handle being in the cafeteria again? Would she feel safe if the boys were in the hallway? They made a list together of what would help Poppy feel ready to go back. No rush timeline, no pressure to make nice with anyone. Just practical steps like having a buddy system and knowing she could call me anytime. Poppy seemed lighter after that meeting, like someone finally got it. Ginny came by my apartment the next week to talk about what happens next. We sat at my kitchen table going through all these forms about kinship care. She explained there were programs that could help with money if I became Poppy's permanent guardian. The state would give me $600 a month for her expenses, plus help with her therapy bills. We agreed to check in again in a month when things settled down more. The idea of raising Poppy full-time felt huge, but also like the only thing that made sense. She mentioned the boys' parents would probably fight it, but the court would look at what's best for Poppy, not what the family wants. 3 days later, David's wife texted me a picture of a receipt. The boys had made their first payment toward the money they stole from Grandma. $50 from the older one's McDonald's check and $20 from the younger one's paper route. She wanted me to know they were facing real consequences and learning to pay back what they took. I saved the picture but didn't reply. At this rate, it would take them years to pay back the full $2,000, but at least it was something. The court made them put half of everything they earned toward paying Grandma back. That night, I sat on my couch with Poppy asleep next to me, her head on my shoulder. I grabbed a notebook and started writing down what I could actually control in all this mess. Keep Poppy safe was number 1. Show up to all the appointments was 2. Take things one day at a time was 3. The family was broken, money was tight, and nothing was wrapped up neat and clean. But Poppy was here, breathing steady against my arm, finally getting some real sleep for the first time in weeks. That had to be enough for now. Well, folks, that's our time for today. Thanks for letting me throw in my 2 cents while we went through this story. Catch you in the next one. If you made it to the end, drop a comment. I love reading all your comments.